So this is a super interesting story that's been developing over the past couple of months. But first, guys, we've got to look at some insane footage out of Arizona. As I mentioned, this is a story that's been brewing for a few months. Instead, they said the object was actually described as a diamond-shaped object. On September, another pilot reported a close call with an unknown aircraft. This is a Freedom of Information Act request from someone asking for more details on these incidents. But that theory doesn't really work out because the Chinese balloon program has been well documented. And there is a good chance that we're closer to finding out the truth about UFOs than we've ever been before. If you want to know more about that, check out my video on the signal that might be a countdown, and we're almost out of time. We know exactly what they're doing, and we know exactly where they're doing it. And none of those places match up with where these sightings were reported. So what is going on? Who knows? But here's what I do know. Something weird is definitely happening here. Either NORAD made a huge mistake, accidentally reporting the wrong information and then covering it up when they realized their mistake, or there's something going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. Personally, I tend to believe the latter. If you look at the history of UFO research, it's clear that the government routinely lies to us and hides evidence. There have been countless cases where witnesses come forward and tell the government about UFO sightings. But then the government does everything they can to discredit those witnesses. For example, back in the 1960s, there was a rash of UFO sightings across the United States, and the government responded by starting a program called Project Blue Book. They basically set out to debunk every single UFO sighting they could. Now, while Project Blue Book officially ended in 1969, the practice of discrediting witnesses continues to this day. And it's a big part of the reason why most people don't come forward with UFO stories. They know that the government will try to make them look like a crazy person. And once you start labeling people as crazy, it becomes self-fulfilling. People stop coming forward with information, and we as a society stop learning about UFOs. But when they got the response from NORAD, it was heavily redacted. The only thing that they revealed is that both of these encounters involved the same type of aircraft. So clearly, there's something going on here. But NORAD isn't telling us what it is. This time, the pilot was flying at 41,000 feet when he spotted an unmarked aircraft directly in front of him. The pilot started to descend and the object turned on its transponder and began descending as well. But here's the thing. Even though the object turned on its transponder, the pilot never received any information. He was still in contact with air traffic control, and they told him that there was no aircraft in the area that was supposed to be there. So again, we have this mysterious object flying around in the sky that nobody knows anything about. And if you ask me, that's even weirder because the only military aircraft I can think of that's designed as a diamond is the F-35. But if that was the case, why did they initially say it was a Delta? And why did they feel the need to correct themselves? Well, some people believe that NORAD made a mistake. But I think they probably had classified information that they weren't supposed to reveal. And that's why they had to issue a correction. But that's just speculation. But it starts off with something pretty shocking. One day in August, NORAD published their annual report on near misses between commercial aircraft and military jets that are training for space. And in this report, they talk about this close call that happened between a civilian airplane and a USSF A-1221, which is a special mission aircraft that is most likely used for tracking satellites. Here's what the report says. The civilian pilot reported that he was flying at 39,000 feet when he saw a delta-shaped object at his 9 o'clock about 150 feet away. The pilot immediately recognized it as another aircraft. He initiated a brake maneuver to the right of the other aircraft to avoid a collision. At the closest point of the encounter, the distance between the two airplanes was less than 500 feet. Now that doesn't sound too bad until you realize that the standard buffer zone between airplanes is 500 feet. So this was a near miss. But here's the thing, when NORAD publishes these reports, they don't usually dive into the details. They usually leave out things like what the object looked like. They just say that there was an unknown object, and that's it. But in this case, they actually said it was delta-shaped. That's a weird detail to include, especially since the vast majority of military aircraft aren't delta-shaped. The only military aircraft in the U.S. fleet that has a delta wing shape is the SR-71 Blackbird, but the SR-71 hasn't flown in decades. In fact, the SR-71 was only flown between 1964 and 1998, and it was retired due to being too expensive to maintain. And in the 30 years since the SR-71 was retired, there hasn't been a single other aircraft built with a delta wing design. So who was this pilot seeing? Was he seeing an experimental prototype that we don't know about? Was it a foreign spy plane? Or was it something else entirely? Take a look at this. You might think, whoa, what are those bright lights? And even though it looks like they might be UFOs, the truth is a little more mundane. These strange lights were actually balloons that were released at an event called the Arizona UFO Festival in October. Now, that's not a real UFO festival, but it's just a fun name for a hot air balloon festival that happened in October. But these balloons were drifting dangerously off course and ended up floating all the way into restricted airspace around Luke Air Force Base, which is one of the main training grounds for fighter pilots in the United States Air Force. Obviously, this caused quite the stir with air traffic control, because now they've got these random objects floating into restricted airspace, where fighter pilots do dogfights and other training exercises. And if one of those fighter pilots mistakenly shot at one of those balloons, or collided with one of those balloons, well, then you've got a very serious situation on your hands. Not to mention the potential for debris from these balloons raining down onto people below. So obviously, whoever was in charge of these hot air balloons made a massive mistake. And when the military put out an alert saying they were looking for a missing hot air balloon, they got a call back from the organizers of this balloon festival. They said, yeah, we think we're responsible. So the military stood down and everything ended okay. But that near miss really highlights the difficulty of identifying anomalous aerial vehicles in the sky. Because while most balloon festivals are as mundane as you could possibly imagine, there have been plenty of times where hot air balloons have been mistaken for actual UFOs. In fact, a hot air balloon was the very first unidentified flying object ever recorded by the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON. And even recently, in 2021, a guy in Florida had to call the police because he saw a strange hot air balloon floating through the night sky. But when the police finally found the owner of the hot air balloon, they learned that it had actually escaped from a secret Illuminati meeting that was happening in the middle of the swampland. Okay, I'm just kidding. It was actually an escapee from a secret satanic ritual. But still, even in 2023, hot air balloons can fool people. And with so many different types of advanced aircraft out there, plus drones, plus balloons from foreign governments, plus the fact that we have no idea how many UFOs might be operating in our skies, well, it makes sense why the public would be confused sometimes. And it also makes sense why the military continues to train fighter pilots on how to identify and track these mysterious objects. But now, let's get back to our story. Well, here's the thing. After NORAD included that weird detail about the delta-shaped aircraft, it quickly issued a correction saying that it wasn't delta-shaped at all. But things get even weirder when we find out about another close call that happened just a month later. And if you're thinking that maybe these two stories aren't connected, let me show you this document. Now, some people say that maybe these are part of China's spy balloon program. But here's the thing. Even though the government has done a good job of hiding evidence in the past, times are changing.